Welcome to another installment of Turn Up the AC Hot Takes with Reason on a solo edition. So recently, Terence Crawford has been doing his rounds and interviews, promoting his fight with David Avanesian. But truth be told, he's spending more time speaking about Errol Spence than he is about promoting his actual fight. So recently, Terence Crawford tried to bash Errol Spence's resume at 147. So since he brought it up, let's talk about it. He's saying that, questioning basically who Errol Spence is beating, and saying that he's not the top dog at 147. So let's get into the resumes. Well, before we get into it, and talk about who they've beaten at welterweight, Crawford could have forced a fight with Spence in his first fight at welterweight, due to the fact that Crawford was undisputed at 140. But his team, as stated by trainer Bomac, stated that they chose the easy route and chose to go after Jeff Horn instead of forcing a fight with Spence or even Keith Thurman. Because at the time, Keith Thurman was, I believe, the unified champ, and Errol Spence was the IBF champ. Now, this is something that cannot be debated. This is a fact. Bomac said this in an interview a couple years back, that they chose the easy route. So let's talk about the resumes. Errol Spence has spent more time at welterweight, so we're only going to start his resume when he became champion, and that is when he beat Cal Brook. So Crawford at welterweight holds wins over Jeff Horn, Jose Benavidez Jr., Amir Khan, Idris Kavalaskas, or aka Mean Machine, Cal Brook, and Sean Porter. Errol Spence has wins over Cal Brook, Lamont Peterson, Carlos Ocampo, Mikey Garcia, Sean Porter, Danny Garcia, and Yordenis Ugas. And before the Ugas fight, Spence was actually signed to fight Manny Pacquiao, but had to pull out with a torn retina. So let's look at Crawford's resume. Jeff Horn. At the time that he fought Crawford, Jeff Horn was a WBO champ. But if we're being honest, he was really no champion at all, because anybody who saw his fight with Manny Pacquiao knows that Jeff Horn did not beat Manny Pacquiao. Pacquiao won that fight, I thought, going away. And I actually had Pacquiao winning that fight 117 to 111. A wide margin. And the referee almost stopped the fight in the 9th round, telling Jeff Horn he better show him something in the next round or he's going to stop the fight. Jose Benavidez Jr. had been shot a couple years prior to fighting Crawford. And early in the fight, Benavidez actually gave Crawford some problems. And as the fight went on, it was clear that Benavidez and his ability to move was slowing down, and he could not move around the ring anymore. He lost movement, and as the fight went on, ultimately Crawford was able to stop him late in the 12th round. Amir Khan was a joke of a fight, and they put that fight on pay-per-view. Crawford easily put Khan away. I had no interest in this fight at all, and Crawford actually tried to call Amir Khan a signature win. But let's keep it real. Khan had been knocked out by Danny Garcia at 140, like 4 years prior to Khan fighting Crawford. And he was also brutally KO'd by Canelo about 2 years prior to facing Terence Crawford. Now, Mean Machine, that was a pretty decent fight. But we're not going to act like Mean Machine was or has ever been a top 6, top 7 welterweight. It was a decent fight, though. I give Crawford credit for this one. Although early in the fight, Mean Machine did not get credit for a knockdown that he had on Crawford. But Crawford did show that he was a superior fighter, and he broke down Mean Machine as the fight went on, ultimately stopping him in the later rounds. Now, Cal Brook, to me, was a shot fighter by the time he faced Crawford. He hadn't fought at 147 in over 3 years since he lost to Spence, and he lost his IBF title to Errol Spence. And then after the fight with Errol Spence, he said he couldn't make welterweight anymore, so he didn't fight again at 147 until the Crawford fight. He spent his time campaigning at 154 and maybe fought 2-3 times before facing Crawford. So, and once Kell Brook took any sort of a shot from Crawford, he folded. The fight was done. Now, Sean Porter, by far the best name on Crawford's resume at 147, but he was coming off a 400-plus day layoff and only fought one time against an unknown fighter, Sebastian Formella, between the Errol Spence and Terence Crawford fights. And by the time Porter fought Crawford, he was already 1 foot in retirement and heading into the Crawford fight. And it was obvious that he was thinking about retirement already, regardless, win or lose, because as soon as the fight was over, Sean Porter announced that he was no longer going to be fighting and he was retiring. Granted, Crawford still was the first and only person to stop Sean Porter, at the end of the day. That is a fact. But yeah, let's not pretend like the Sean Porter that fought Terence Crawford was the same Sean Porter that fought Errol Spence Jr. Because like I said, Porter was already in retirement after that fight, regardless of whether he won or lost. So let's go talk about the wins that Spence has at welterweight. Kell Brook. Now, yes, Kell Brook was coming off a devastating loss to Triple G, where he had his orbital bone fractured, but he did have the home field advantage. Spence went overseas to face him in the UK, and he fought him for the IBF strap. So Kell Brook was a champion at the time that Errol Spence fought him. The fight was competitive early, but Spence ultimately fractured Kell Brook's other orbital bone during the fight, and he ended up stopping him in the later rounds. Lamont Peterson was dominated by Errol Spence, and a lot of people believe I believe it was the fight prior, maybe 1 or 2 fights prior, that Lamont Peterson beat Danny Garcia. So I'm not one of those people. I actually thought Danny Garcia won the fight, but it definitely was a close fight. So Peterson was coming off a pretty good performance, whether you think he won or lost against Danny Garcia, because that was a very close fight. But Spence dominated Lamont Peterson and stopped him. Carlos Ocampo was a mandatory fight for Spence, and he took the mandatory defense, stopped him with a body shot in the first round. End of show. 1 round. But Carlos Ocampo, that victory actually has aged well, because recently Ocampo had a good showing against Sebastian Fundora at 154, going the distance with him. And Fundora has been known to be a beast at 154, and he's just waiting for his chance to face Charlo for the belts, if he gets that chance, before Jermell Charlo vacates and moves up to 160. Mikey Garcia was constantly calling out Spence, claiming that he saw something that he could exploit. But it was a one-sided, dominant performance, and Mikey did his best just to survive, and Spence proved he had the superior boxing skills. People are going to try to hold it against Spence that he didn't stop Mikey Garcia, but Spence won every round, dominated Mikey Garcia, showed that he had superior boxing skills, and after the fight, Mikey was never the same, and 2 fights later, he's retiring from the sport of boxing. Now, before you say anything about, oh, Mikey Garcia moved up 2 weight classes, yes, this is true, but Mikey Garcia was out here calling Spence out like in every interview he could. And at this time, Spence was having trouble getting any of the top guys in the ring with him. So he took the Mikey Garcia fight, handled his business, and kept it pushing. And Mikey Garcia, in my opinion, is, take away the Sean Porter name from Crawford's resume at 147, Mikey Garcia is a bigger name and better name on Spence's resume than any other fighter that Crawford has beaten at 147. People forget how dominant Mikey was in the lower weight classes of 135 and 140. Now, Sean Porter, granted, he was coming off of a controversial win over Yordenis Ugas by the time he fought Errol Spence, but he was a WBC champ. He did beat Danny Garcia in a very close fight. And this was the best Shawn Porter that I think we ever saw. Whether it be the Thurman fight, the Danny Garcia fight, Adrian Broner, whatever. This was the best Shawn Porter we saw. And Errol Spence beat him at his own fight. It was a dog fight. And Spence dropped him in the 11th round. Very close fight, but Spence to me was the clear winner in a very close fight. Now moving on to Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia was the first fight for Spence coming off his car accident where he nearly lost his life. And he did not take any tune-up. And he took a very dangerous Danny Garcia, who was a top 5 welterweight at the time. Danny had 2 previous losses to Keith Thurman and Shawn Porter, but by the narrowest of margins. And each of those fights could have easily went Danny Garcia's way. I actually thought Danny Garcia beat Keith Thurman, and I thought it was more of a draw between him and Shawn Porter. But there were very close fights, could have went either way. I'm not mad at the outcomes. But when he faced Spence, Spence beat him decisively by a wide margin, 117-111, the most clear-cut loss of Danny Garcia's career. And lastly, and most recently, Errol Spence stopped Yordenis Ugas. And Ugas was coming off of his best performance of his career, capturing the WBA belt from legend Manny Pacquiao. And he sent Manny Pacquiao into retirement, a fight that Spence was supposed to have, but had to pull out due to retina surgery. And this fight, Spence was coming off another decent layoff as well. So, because his last fight before this was like 17 months prior, and that was against Danny Garcia. But early in the fight, you could see some ring rust for Spence, because Ugas had some success early. Took a couple of rounds though, but once Spence got into a rhythm, he dominated Ugas the rest of the fight, broke his right orbital bone, and stopping him in the process. Now, that Ugas fight, people say Spence got hurt or whatever, stunned. I don't believe Spence was hurt. Spence did something where his mouthpiece fell out and he looked at it or something, momentarily taking his eyes off Ugas, which is something you shouldn't do. But Ugas caught him with 2 hits back to back. Errol Spence ate him, didn't get stunned, didn't fall, nothing. Came back, dominated the fight from that point on. No matter how you look at their resumes, Spence has the better resume. I don't think it's even close at welterweight than Crawford. When you factor in who Crawford abandoning the negotiations with Spence to fight Avanesian, it makes it look even worse, because fighting David Avanesian, leaving the negotiation table with Errol Spence, and potentially now Spence may face a Keith Thurman. Even Spence's backup fight against Keith Thurman is a way better fight than Terence Crawford versus David Avanesian, because Thurman is ranked top 3, top 4 in every belt. WBA, WBC, WBO, IBF. He's a top 3, 4 fighter in every of those belt rankings. And Avanesian is nowhere near that. But, yeah, so as far as I'm concerned, I believe Spence has a way better resume at 147. And I just hope that we do get this fight at some point. But with the way Crawford's talking about Spence and PBC, I don't know if we're ever going to get this fight. But I had to talk about this a little bit because, Crawford brought it up, saying that his resume was better. And we went through everything from every one of Crawford's fights and then every one of Spence's fights since he became champion. And Spence's resume, I think, clearly outweighs Terence Crawford's resume. And that's taking nothing away from Terence Crawford as a fighter, as a talent, and his skill set. It takes nothing away from that. But we got to start calling it how we see it. And clearly the resume favors Errol Spence Jr. So I just wanted to drop my thoughts on the resumes between undefeated champions Terence Crawford and Errol Spence Jr. So go ahead and let me know in the comment section who you think has the better resume, and who's the better fighter, and if these two ever fight, who do you think wins and why? Go ahead and comment and hate, debate, whatever you want to do. We appreciate it all. This has been Reason. Turn up the AC Hot Takes, and we're out.